today we're going to be learning and discovering how we can learn more like a polyglot. And the first thing that might come to your mind is, well, what is a polyglot? A polyglot is someone who knows and can communicate in many languages. And so today we're going to go over four key aspects of what makes language learning so successful for polyglots. So the very first thing is immersion. And so we want to focus on how we can immerse ourselves in the language. And so immersion, and we're going to break that into three different key aspects. And these are actually the three keys to learning any new language. And it's comprehensible input, comprehensible output, and feedback. And don't worry, it's not actually as complicated as it sounds. So comprehensible input, well, what is that? In a nutshell, it just basically means exposure. And so polyglots are experts at this. They just expose themselves and inundate themselves with tons of content in the target language that they're learning. One of the key aspects of that comprehensible part is that they're not exposing themselves to high level language. They're not listening to physics classes in that target language. They're listening to simple things, maybe short stories or podcasts or watching movies or TV shows, or even content that is geared more towards children. And so this really ties into the Yerkes-Dodson law. So if you look at this chart over here, you'll see two red spots. And so this is where we don't want to be. So we want to make sure that we're challenging ourselves to the degree to where it's actually doing us some good. So if we tend to do things that are too easy and are too simple, we're not going to make progress. And so we're going to get bored and we're going to get tired. Now, if we go to the other extreme and we are just way in over our heads, and maybe we're watching a sign language conversation and they are just, their hands are on fire and there's no way that we can keep up. And so then we're going to be stressed and restless and discouraged. So really what we want to find is we want to get right in that middle to where something is just challenging enough to keep us focused and engaged. And that is the sweet spot. And so whatever that is for you, that is what we're going to go for. So we want to expose ourselves to lots of comprehensible input. And again, that's going to be just content in the language that you are trying to learn. Now, the second aspect of that is going to be comprehensible output. And so that is basically, and this is really the challenging part for, I think, most of us, because we're perfectionists. We're afraid of making mistakes. But it's that comprehensible output is when we're producing the language that we're trying to learn. And so this can be really challenging because we don't want to, we're scared, or maybe we're introverted, or we don't want to make those mistakes. We don't want to look silly. And we're subconscious and we're very self-conscious as adults versus children who have no problem just using what they know. So the comfort zone, right? And if we just consistently stay in that comfort zone, we're never going to make the progress that we want. And so it's not until we reach outside of that comfort zone that we really will start making that progress. So even though you may only know 100 signs or 200 signs, that's enough to be comprehensible. And so it's just using what you know, and that will continually not only solidify what you have been learning so far, but it's actually going to really help you identify what you need to learn next. So that is really a key aspect of language learning in general. Now, the last one is actually feedback. And I'm going to steal this point from Chris Lonsdale's TED Talk that we discussed in the previous unit. And one of the things that he talked about, aside from high frequency language, is a language parent. And so I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper as far as what that entails. And so the very first point is a good language parent is going to work to understand what you're saying. And it's funny because he mentions that spouses actually aren't that great of a language parent. And we'll kind of get into why that is. But we want to find somebody that works to understand what you're saying. And so we want to find somebody that isn't overly critical and somebody that isn't looking to put us down. We want to look for somebody that really, truly wants to understand you. And parents are naturally that way with their children. They really want to understand what their kids are saying. So they're going to put in the effort to try to understand. The second point is, again, not correcting every single mistake. We want to find that good language parent and somebody that is going to not correct every mistake, because we will make tons of mistakes. And we think about a language parent with their child, and we don't correct every single mistake they make. And if they do make a mistake, usually we correct that mistake by modeling the language for them and by repeating what that sentence should have been. And so they're learning from modeling and not necessarily criticism. The next one is confirms understanding by using correct language. We want to find somebody that is going to be able to confirm that they understand by using the correct language. So this would be modeling. And so let's say somebody uses a sentence and it's a little off, but you understand. You worked to understand it. You didn't correct that mistake, but you're going to go ahead and model what that was for. And so obviously this language parent is going to be somebody that is more advanced than you. And so this is going to be somebody that can correct you, somebody that can understand you, somebody that is patient. And that leads into the last point is that they're going to be using words that the learner knows. So we think, again, the way we talk to our children is much different than we would talk to other adults because we're matching and emulating the language that they are familiar with. If you have a 2-year-old son or daughter, you're not going to say, you need to go to the restroom. You're going to say, oh, do you need to go potty? And so that's where their language is at. And a good language parent is going to be able to identify where you are at personally and be able to match you. And then again, kind of challenge you a little bit and get into that Yerkes-Dodson law to where you're being challenged, so you'll be able to make that progress. And so those are 4 key aspects that you'll want to look for in a good language parent. You could find somebody that is of a higher level that will work to understand what you're saying, will not correct every mistake. You do want mistakes to be corrected, but usually by modeling and by using that correct language and confirming that understanding, and definitely somebody that can match your language. So that's basically the first point. The big takeaway is that we really need to immerse ourselves in the language if we want to make progress in the language. And so again, that's comprehensible input. We're taking in information and we're taking in lots of content and from various sources. It could be content meant for kids. It could be content that is sign language first, and maybe they have captions so we can follow along what they're saying. Or it could be interpreted content. It could be music. It could be lots of different things. But the key aspect is that we want to expose ourselves to as much of the language as possible. And then we want to go outside our comfort zone and use what we know and get that feedback from somebody that can be a good language parent for us. The second way we can learn like a polyglot is to have a plan. All polyglots have in common is that they have some kind of system in place. And that system may vary from person to person, but they have some kind of plan. And the reason why that is so important is this quote that I really enjoy from Benjamin Franklin. And he says, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. That is so true. If we don't come up with a plan, eventually we're going to run out of steam and eventually it's going to stop being fun and we're just going to give up. So that's why it is so important that we, in the beginning, come up with and identify our reason why we're learning the language. But secondly, come up with that plan. Come up with achievable goals and come up with a system that you can be consistent with. And that leads to another quote by Hal Elrod. And this is a really inspirational thing. So he mentions every goal we have is preceded by a process. The secret to success is to be committed to the daily process. And that's really the key aspect right there is a daily process. And this is what makes learning a language as a student so difficult. We're only learning it for maybe one time a week. And so there's one day where we learn, and then there's 6 days where we don't, and then we learn, and then we don't. And it's just, it's really hard to kind of gain that momentum when it's start, stop like that. And so the secret is really to find a daily process that works for you. And he goes on to say, create excitement and enthusiasm for the possibility of achieving your goals. And again, this all ties back to having the reason why, to having a system of how, and then you can really accomplish the what aspect of things, to really focus on the language itself. And so that daily process, what can that look like? And so again, we want to expose ourselves to as much of the language as possible. And it doesn't have to be lessons all the time. It doesn't have to be here's 10 words for today. Here's a list of 25 words. Here's grammar. It doesn't have to be structured like that. In fact, the more natural the language we expose ourselves to, the better our language is going to be. And so we might actually get more mileage out of watching vlogs or watching YouTube videos, watching deaf as they're communicating, or you can even watch like interpreted content. And so you're getting language as it is and less so out of context. And that is a really key aspect that can really help propel our progress forward very quickly. Now, the third aspect of how we can learn like a polyglot is making it fun. So if we want to make language learning a success in the long run, we have to do things that we enjoy. Because human nature, if we don't enjoy it, we're not going to continue. So it's really important that we find a way to make language learning fun. And so this is where things get really interesting. And so first of all, we want to be exposing ourselves to content that we actually enjoy. And again, that could be YouTube channels, that could be vlogs, that could be movies or TV shows, maybe things like Switched at Birth, or maybe kids shows where they incorporate music and songs, like by Rachel Coleman in Signing Time, or Rachel's Treehouse. And so there's lots of sign language content out there that we can expose ourselves to that can be enjoyable. And even going outside of that, make it fun within the household. Maybe challenge yourself, or if you are living with a spouse or with family or kids, start creating games, start challenging each other, make it competitive. And recently I had one student where the husband wasn't really interested in learning sign language, but his wife was. And so she was sharing with him all the things that she was learning. And so he ended up learning some signs to kind of tease her. And she learned the signs for animals, and she learned bug. And then her husband started teasing her and said, "Hey, bug, come here," or little things like that. But then they really started making it enjoyable, and they made it fun. And so maybe it's flashcards, maybe it's games, maybe it's making things competitive, or maybe it's just us meeting other learners or connecting with other deaf ones and getting involved in their local deaf communities, and just making that entire process enjoyable. Because if we don't, it's not sustainable. And so we really have to make learning sign language fun. So that's going to lead us into our final point in how we can learn like a polyglot. And it's to be patient. And this can be sometimes the hardest part of learning a language, because it takes so long. And as much as we can do to speed up the entire language learning process, there's going to be a long period of time where we just can't communicate what we want to say when we want to say it. And we keep coming back to this analogy of a marathon. And many times we approach that marathon as a sprint. And let's say we have a 26-mile marathon, and we just are so gung-ho and we are so excited. We sprint that entire first mile, and then we're tired, and then our feet hurt, and we're thirsty, and we can barely breathe, and we still have 25 miles to go, and now we're really discouraged. It's not fun anymore, and you know what? It's not worth it. I'm going to give up. So we have to be patient with ourselves, and every time we kind of cross another mile marker, we're at mile marker 1, we're at mile marker 2. The tendency is to think, oh, 24 more miles. A mile marker 3, I still have 23 more miles to go. And it becomes a grind. And that's what we want to avoid. And going into it knowing that it's going to be a marathon can really help us pace ourselves and come up with a daily process that is actually sustainable. And then we can flip the paradigm. And now we're at mile marker 1, mile marker 2, mile marker 3, and we look back and we're like, wow, I've already gotten 3 miles into this. And that entire mindset changes. And now you're more excited and you're getting one step closer to the finish line. And so that's what we really want to do, is we want to approach language learning as a marathon. We want to pause and consider how far we've come rather than how much farther we have to go. And just switching that paradigm can really make an impact as far as us wanting to give up versus I'm going to persevere and I'm going to do this. One more thing about being patient is comparisons. And this is something that again, it's just human nature. We want to compare ourselves to other people. And so let's say we've been learning for a year and somebody else has been learning for a year or maybe 6 months, and it seemingly feels like they are more advanced than you are. That's discouraging, right? And so we have to avoid the trap of comparing ourselves, because really, the second we compare ourselves to somebody else, um, it's going to be really no good can come from it, right? And even if you're the person that says, "Oh, I've been at it a year and I'm farther ahead than that other person," that's still a put down and it's still negative. So what we really need to do is compare ourselves to our previous selves. And so that should be the measure of your success. And we should never measure our success based off of somebody else, whether it's time or signs or they sign better, they're clearer, anything like that. Don't compare your progress to anybody else's, and just really focus on how much farther you have become than you have in the past. And so that is going to help keep you encouraged and stay positive and continue running that race and keeping up in that marathon. And just to briefly review, if we want to learn like a polyglot and really be successful at learning a new language, we want to immerse ourselves in the language as much as possible and keep it appropriately challenging. We don't want it too easy and we don't want it too hard. We need to have a plan, and the plan that can really have a daily implementation will have the best success. Thirdly, we want to make the entire process fun and enjoyable. So that's going to make language learning much more sustainable. And the last one is be patient. You just have to be patient with yourself, and because this is a marathon and it will take a lot of time. And if you can apply even just one of those things, it can really make a difference as far as language learning for you in the long run.